the Tempe History Museum for September 5th, 2019. I'd like to welcome everyone here. The first item on our agenda is a call to the audience. Audience members have up to 3 minutes. If you'd like to speak on an item, please fill out a speaker's card, which can be found in the back of the room, and hand it to our clerk. And we'll go ahead and call your name when it is your turn to speak. And I have some cards, so I will go through those in the order in which I received them. First one is Shannon Dutton. Please state your name and place of residence for the record. Welcome.
I just stand up and speak loud?
If you could sit.
Oh, sit?
Because the microphone.
All right.
And you can still speak loud. Thank you,
Okay.
Shannon.
I'll try because I'm not known for speaking loud. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. I'm Shannon Dutton. I'm on Fillmore Street in Tempe for over 30 years. My home is one of several areas that flood in north of the Tempe Town Lake. The flooding has been occurring for over 8 years. It cost me over $450 a year for flood insurance. I live with sandbags in front of my garage, which means I can't park in it. I have sandbags in front of my house, in my front door, and this is year-round for over 8 years. We've been working with the city and Maricopa County Flood Control since the flooding began. And like I said, I've been in that area at that house for over 30 years. Maricopa County Flood Control presented their findings and the cost to remediate the flooding issue in 2016. I very much appreciate Mayor DeRosa and Greg Kent for letting me know and let all of us know in those areas that you guys were having this meeting today. So thank you to them. The city, at this presentation, the city of Scottsdale and the city of Tempe and the residents in both those cities were invited to Maricopa County's flood presentation. Since then, Scottsdale has requested funding from Maricopa County for 3 of their flood issues. They've received the funds and used the funds. Basically, I need a better understanding as where our sense of urgency is in this issue. We need to get this areas flooding remediated in the areas north of Tempe Town Lake. And I look forward to further communication with Greg Kent, Marilyn DeRosa, and all of you. And thank you for taking time to hear me today.
Thank you, Shannon. I believe Councilman Navarro, is he on the phone? I don't know. Okay. Next is Anna Melise. Is that how you say it? Anna Mellis. I had a Mr. Mellis was my teacher. I don't know if it was related.
Probably not, but.
Mr. Mellis. All right.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Anna Mellis, and I will be speaking on the Climate Action Plan. Let me start by saying that it is highly admirable that Tempe is forming a climate action plan. However, as a planet, we are running out of time, and that means Tempe must act fast. The plan calls for us to work with utilities so we can create resilience hubs, places of refuge such as mosques, temples, churches, government organizations, and nonprofits for those who are most vulnerable in our community, senior citizens, children, and the homeless. We need the utilities to allow these community-focused groups to put up enough solar to fully power their building, which will be needed for cooling stations, general shelter in case of a blackout, homeless shelters, and for community needs. Right now, you can only put enough solar to cover 33% of the building's energy. This is shameful for the Valley of the Sun. The transportation section of the plan needs development. For example, Maricopa County will be gearing up to put a Prop 500 on the ballot to continue Prop 400's transportation tax. Right now, regional transportation funding calls for more freeway ramps. It was written in a different era. Now, in the midst of a climate crisis, we really need safer, complete streets, better bike infrastructure, shaded bus stops, and bus rapid transit. Phoenix is planning for bus rapid transit on Rural Road, and the plan stops at the Tempe border. This is ridiculous. We need to connect to Phoenix and carry that line through Mesa. Also, there will be a disproportionate impact on communities of color, and we need to be implementing emergency utility assistance and find ways, despite utility policies, to expand solar and make it more accessible for people to install it. Lastly, Tempe is building up. The city must adopt a green building code to ensure that these new buildings are built for devastating drought and even more extreme temperatures. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Kendon Young. Oh, yeah.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Kendon Young, and I serve as your chair of the Sustainability Commission. I am a on Sunday 29-year resident here in Tempe, and am based here at Southern and Rural, a product of Broadmoor Elementary, McCamey Middle School, and McClintock High.
Wait, what was that high school again?
McCamey, back when it was called McCamey, yes. So I come to you today, first of all, to express my gratitude and excitement that this council will be talking about the Climate Action Plan, of which the Sustainability Commission, that is comprised of 11 members of your community, have put together and been working really hard on developing this policy space to explore what climate action looks like and how it can be used to advance Tempe values. It is also invigorating to see a Tempe youth, of which I help teach about 100,000 at Arizona State University, that are participating in this and are interested actively in its outcome. So with this, I am excited to see this moving forward. I'm excited for your feedback and the way in which we can incorporate this brand new piece of policy space to talk about how this can advance our values, and appreciate your leadership in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendon. All right, next is Ken Gaffney Loza. Come on down.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Kim Gaffney Loza. I live in North Tempe. And Darlene Justice wanted to be here today, but it's been really difficult. And she has a lot more knowledge on this subject than I, because this is not something I've been directly covering like she. But one of the things that I want to bring up, which goes along with the whole theme today with the climate change, is we're experiencing more and more big storms. Not quite as often as we had storms before, but when we do get them, they seem to be of greater intensity. This year being an outlier so far. I just came back from a native plant seminar this weekend, and one of the things that they talked about increasingly during that was how they're seeing plants that are moving further and further north, and really a lot of plants that are dying out in certain areas due to climate change. This flood control project, I think, is very important for our neighborhood because we're getting really impacted by the cities above us. Right now, we have a lot of problems, as you heard Shannon speak. She's been dealing with it for many years. And the water is coming down in a lot of cases, not only down Scottsdale Road, but also down from Phoenix Papago Park, and it comes under the canal, behind the school, and down the street. Well, right at 64th and McDowell, they're going to be putting in a big development. And that looks like the water drainage, from what I saw of the plans for Entrada, is going to take more water that, you know, we have increased drainage when it comes off of buildings down that same pathway. So I'm hoping, just like my fellow plant nerds were in being proactive as far as trying to plant diversity and plan for this climate change, that we're also proactive in our treatment of what's going to be increasingly flood issues, I think, in the area. And that's all. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kim. All right. Next is John Penry. Did I say that right?
Yeah, you got it right.
Okay. I don't know. It's like a
I didn't write
treasure
very
trying to
well.
read all the handwriting.
I should type it next time. Thank you, Mayor and council members, for allowing me to come and speak today. I'm representing a group called the Community Climate Livability Project. We're a group from Broadmoor Neighborhood Association. We didn't know the climate action plan was going on, so we thought we'd do our own thing. Then we found out you are doing something, so that's good news for us. It's also really interesting that some of the very things that we've wanted to do, such as locate solar and battery storage in community centers, is something that's also in line with what y'all's goals are as well. I do want to point out one of the things that we are also working on is it's a concept out of California. Not all bad things come from California. So community choice aggregation is this concept that we're working on. And we're trying to create our own cooperative where we can do that within our own communities and not just have a choice. We don't have a choice to whom we buy the power from, but maybe we get a choice of where the power is generated and how it's generated. And that'd be very important for us. Thank you.
Yes. Vice Mayor.
You might be interested to know, there's a rumor floating around that the Arizona Corporation Commission might be considering community choice aggregation, and that a Republican member might be introducing said proposal. So stay tuned, and there's a lot of groups that organize to have people attend those meetings and call for that action.
I had lunch with them. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, John. All right, Scott Webster, come on down. State your name and place of residence for the record.
Scott Webster at 502 East Vista del Cerro in Tempe. So it's located right next to Daly Park, more or less, and specifically the corner of Ventura and Vista del Cerro. So Vista del Cerro, east-west, right on the south side of the tracks, just to give you orientation, which is important for my comment. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm here to formally...
Can you lean closer
Sure.
to the microphone? Thank you.
Is this the microphone here?
Yep, that little thing right there.
So I'm here to formally register my concern about a storm drain located at the corner of Ventura and Vista del Cerro. So August 2018, so last year, we had a lake surround our house. So this is a design issue. In fact, I brought a picture. I'll leave it here to make a little bit concrete, but and maybe the person in front can bring it up. But you can see that there's a lake. There's somebody standing in about 3 feet of water. We had about 6 inches inside of our house. And I believe there are potential remedies that aren't a big cost because we're right close to Daly Park. So there might be some drainage opportunities. So I believe my neighbor can be more specific on some of the opportunities. So most importantly, I encourage the council to prioritize this issue in the development of their storm drain management plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Joe Ewan.
My name's Joe Ewan, 1608 South Ventura Drive. Scott and I are neighbors. So we live at the same Vista del Cerro Ventura Drive intersection. I came to speak about the area drainage master plan, and I wanted to support it and then urge the mayor and council to elevate it as a significant priority going forward. Scott mentioned last August, we had a fairly significant rain event, not more rain than we've had in other storms in the last 20 years. But during that, my house also flooded. I had about 10 inches of water up against the house and about 3 inches of water inside my entire house. It did about $30,000 worth of damage to the home. Particularly problematic is that neither of us live in a floodplain. So when we both bought our houses, the reasonable thing is to consider if you live in a floodplain, and we don't. Unfortunately, we live in a flood hazard area as defined by several studies done by the city of Tempe. I wish I'd have known about those studies, but I didn't. And so not living in a floodplain, I would have never occurred to me to buy flood insurance. So all that damage, we were kind of on our own in that regard. But it was really troubling to find out that since 2010, the city of Tempe has known both of our houses were in a flood hazard area. And so I understand, the pace of government, that you do a study and you can't fix it next year. but it seems like in 9 years, you might have been able to address it, or you at least could have let us know that we were in a flood hazard area. So I think that's problematic, and that in itself should raise it as a priority. I mentioned I didn't know this. I spoke to my lender. My lender was troubled by this, that in fact, I live in a defined flood hazard area in my city, but I don't live in a floodplain. And so it kind of puts us in an in-between spot where the lender wouldn't even have the proper information to know, to recommend or require that we have flood insurance. So in any case, I think it's a particularly troubling problem, and our particular issue is even more muddy, and I won't go into all the details, but partly why our homes flooded was we're reliant on a city of Tempe drainage pipe, which dumps into an SRP canal, which then crosses a Union Pacific Railroad culvert. It's a perfect storm where everyone can point their finger at another party and say, well, it must have been their fault. But in the meantime, we're kind of hoping we don't have another big storm in August. And so I think from what I understand about the area drainage master plan, it's addressed some of these issues where it's not a drainage system dependent on several other entities. It's a drainage system recommendation that Tempe can take responsibility for. So I hope you raise this in the future. Thanks.
Thank you. Next is Jeannie Devine.
Hello, thank you for joining me, City Council and Mayor. I was at a great meeting last week at United Nations in Salt Lake City, and so I come back all fired up for really doing some really good things for clean energy. So I have three things that I want to say about the Tempe Climate Action Plan. The first one is I'm completely supportive, whatever you can do, to have investments in all-electric orbit buses. I'd really like to see that expanded in Tempe. I'd like to see it expanded to other cities, and are connecting with other cities on that. And my second point is that I can't read my own notes here. But in addressing global warming, I think it's imperative that we look at emergency utility assistance for people, especially who are low income, primarily for people who are low income. In the past, I myself was able to get a voucher from SRP to put solar panels on, but so many low-income people need to have assistance. We should not be living in a society where the heat it's hotter every day and every night. And people who are low income need to have vouchers. So I am asking the City Council that we really put the pressure behind SRP or work with SRP so that vouchers are available to low-income persons so that they will be able to afford solar energy on their houses, on their residences. So, and then the third point I have is the resilience hubs, which I read a little bit about. And I think that's a really great idea for Tempe to have resilience hubs. And again, I understand that SRP will not allow them to be fully solarized. I think only up to like 30% or 35% or something like that. So I just want to support the council and anything that you can do to work with SRP to a place that is a resilience hub and that is supporting people who are have desperate need for emergency housing. That place should be fully solarized. There should just no reason why organizations that provide that service should be paying for energy when they could have solar. Those are my 3 points. Do you have anything to say?
Thank you, Jeannie.
Okay, thank you.
All right, that's all the cards I have. Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to address us on any of the items listed on the agenda? Could you please get my attention? Seeing none, I'll close that portion and go to the issue review session items. The first one is the storm drainage management plan. I think this is kind of appropriate time to have this discussion, but not soon enough.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. I'm Marilyn DeRosa. I'm the Director of the Engineering and Transportation Department. And we're here to talk about the storm drainage management plan we recently completed. I want to thank you for taking the time to hear our presentation, and I'd like to thank the members of the community that joined us here today. Greg and I have been working with these community members over the last couple of years, and the culmination of that work is the development of this plan. Stormwater management in Arizona is an interesting topic. It doesn't rain often, but when it does, it tends to pour. In the same vein, we don't think a lot about our stormwater systems until we need them. This is the first time that the city has looked at stormwater drainage community-wide, identified and validated areas of concern, and developed possible solutions. Greg Kent is our CIP manager for our engineering design section. He's also our floodplain manager for the city. He's going to present those storm drain infrastructure recommendations tonight based on studies and planning work that we completed over the last few years with the support of the Flood Control District of Maricopa County. We are not asking for any actions from council tonight. This item is for information only. You'll see elements of this plan in the upcoming CIP program.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. As mentioned, I'm Greg Kent. I'm the CIP Design Manager for the Engineering Division, and I'm going to make a presentation on our recently completed storm drain master plan. We believe that flooding protection most closely aligns with the safe and secure communities performance measure for the council. The measure 1.27 to achieve 100% compliance with industry standards related to infrastructure and assets. We have just begun working on a more narrow performance measure, which will be looking at setting a citywide minimum level of protection for a typical storm frequency. As mentioned, storm runoff volumes have been managed under multiple criteria. Older areas were designed and constructed with minimal flooding protection standards, no retention requirements, and just directed toward the Salt River or other outfalls. Our current design criteria meet regionally and national recommended levels of protection, with retention for the 100-year storm on site, with the streets designed to carry the 10-year storm flows, and the streets plus the right-of-way designed to carry the 100-year storm flows. Flows that exceed that storm drain, that volume in the streets and right-of-way capacity are designed to be put in storm drains. One factor that makes storm water runoff management difficult is the nature of our storms. Microbursts during the summer storms dump a lot of water in a small area over a short period of time, but we can't really design for these, and flooding can occur anywhere at any time during these time periods. Winter or non-monsoon storms are less intense, but can last longer over a wider area, making it difficult to determine the combination of the two make it difficult to determine where flooding could occur, but designs are based on the winter and non-monsoon storms. Tempe's current storm drain management consists of two programs. The Storm Drain Maintenance Program, led by Jeremy Mikas, located in our Water Utilities Division, inspects and cleans our storm drains and other drainage facilities citywide, utilizing remote cameras and a vacuum truck. The current Storm Drain Capital Program is located in engineering, where we repair and replace catch basins and other deteriorating infrastructure and provide spot improvements to improve capacity. Several years back, the Flood Control District began a program of conducting regional area drainage master studies, or ADMSs, which modeled the surface and storm drain storm flows and depths. Two studies they performed have covered nearly all of Tempe. The Tempe ADMS covered Tempe south of the Salt River and identified 11 areas of greatest concern. And the Lower Indian Bend Wash study which included North Tempe, portions of Scottsdale, Paradise Valley, and a lot of areas north of the Salt River, found 4 areas of Tempe of highest concern. If you note, the red arrows on the map up there sort of illustrate where the outfalls go. So the ones north of the river either go into the Indian Bend Wash or the Salt River. The ones south of the Salt River flow north to the Salt River, and the ones south of the 60 flow into regional and local retention basins. So to utilize these studies from the Maricopa County to the utmost and give ourselves an approach to address the issues citywide, we commissioned the Tempe Storm Drain Master Study. Conceptual plans for each of the areas of concern were created. The study then ranked these areas of concern in Tempe along with the mitigation plans to determine which of these areas should be tackled first. Rankings were based on the size of the area benefited, the amount of damage reduction, protection levels, and costs, and other criteria. The goal is to raise the levels of protection for the most people over the greatest areas. Here's a map showing the rough boundaries of the areas that were identified of highest potential for flooding. As you can see, most of those are north, quite a ways north, that the areas of the south of those areas were designed to the higher standards that we mentioned earlier, and therefore are less prone to flooding.
Hang on 1 second. Councilmember Adams.
Greg, I have a question. The individuals that came up and spoke about what's happened in their houses, I was just wondering if they're on in the top priority list.
They're in that area. Their areas, I believe, 6 and 7. Sorry.
Mayor, members of council, there are the folks that spoke tonight. Shannon Dutton's home is up in that area numbered 14, above on the north side of the Salt River. And then
So is that considered a priority area?
it is considered a priority area, yes. And when we get to the next slide, Greg will show you how these various projects were prioritized.
Okay, and then what about the other area? You said you're in 11?
Yeah, east. See, it says 11 east of Daly Park.
Uh-huh.
Neighborhood that Mr. Sorry.
Joe.
That Mr. Joe. And Mr. Webster. That's the neighborhood that those families live in.
Just for clarification, that it's also an area of priority, top priority for this?
Right, they're in this top 15 areas of priority.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Well, the next guy's gonna show you where they rank.
The ranking.
And I just want to make sure that we were on the same page.
Right. So here are the list of the conceptual projects listed by ranking of effectiveness in helping the greatest number of properties. You may want to note that the 2 highest ranked projects are in North Tempe and lap over into Scottsdale. So the area on the far left numbers are the different areas that we identified on the map, and the ranking are 1 through 15 on the third column there.
Vice Mayor Kiwi.
Can you go back to the list? So I know these are general areas, and so you have multiple homes and areas within that are putting those to the top of the list. But I know just specifically on, because I've met with neighbors about specifically College and Geneva on the east side.
Mayor and Vice Mayor, the area of College and Geneva, our model didn't show that it was an area that had persistent standing water or would be subject to flooding. The issues we've identified there have to do with curb cuts and the locations of the catch basins. So we can work in that area with maintenance funding rather than creating a capital program.
Have you communicated that to the neighborhood association?
We haven't discussed that in
multiple
particular.
meetings with council members about that very issue, so it would be great to communicate with them about it.
And just to mention that these are the top 15 areas,
Yeah.
but that's not every area that are
That we
areas of
need,
concern.
yeah.
There's areas
But you make a great point about
all over. And so this is just the top 15.
Councilmember Adams?
Yes. Is the 300 block Fillmore included on the top priorities? I don't see that on this list. And I've also received some big concerns about that area, so.
Yeah, Fillmore is, I believe, actually in area 15.
Okay,
14 and 15 actually impact that neighborhood very specifically, and they're actually right on top of each other there.
okay, all right, great, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we just mentioned that those are the top 15 project areas identified, and they come to roughly $23 million in costs. Currently, we are using general obligation bonds in engineering and parks budgets for small project and small capital infrastructure management. The other sources of funding regionally are from the flood control district that provides matching funds for both large and small projects. We are planning on submitting for matching funds for a small project this fall, and we will also be working with Scottsdale to submit for funding for those two largest projects on the north end of Tempe. So as I mentioned, our next steps will be crafting specific performance measures to increase levels of protection and begin to plans to reach those goals. We will also be submitting for small project funds this fall. We will be also looking to add to our top priority projects to the upcoming CIP. We also will be working with Scottsdale to propose large project funds for a joint project between Scottsdale and Tempe to the Maricopa County Flood Control District. Are there any other questions?
Yes, wait. Before we go there, are you finished?
Yep.
Okay. I do want to let you know, and I think we've heard some residents, and I've talked to some residents as well, more in the area 10 area, which is Bernard and I think Riviera. One of the things I think is we need to let our residents know that we have this plan. So I think this is a timely option to have this plan come forward. And I think you have identified sources of revenue streams that we can help mitigate some of the challenges that we have. So I think that's really good. I don't think I've ever seen a storm drain management study plan, but I think that's important considering where we are and what the individuals that we heard from today. It really shows that we have some significant projects that you guys have there that needs to be part of our budget process. And I think we take that very seriously. And I want our residents to know that this is good information for us to have so we can move forward with this. It's also nice that we're partnering with Maricopa Flood Control District. They have the expertise. You wouldn't think so living in a desert, but believe it or not, it does happen, as a lot of people in this room can say. And I know that it's an opportunity for us to partner with Scottsdale. Are they going to help the costs that we identified in those first two top ones? Is that the total cost of the project, or is that our portion? Are we working with Scottsdale?
Those are total project costs.
Yeah.
That's total project cost.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Keating and Councilmember Erdonda Savage.
Thank you, Mayor. The mayor actually said a lot of what I was going to say. First, I wanted to thank you, Marilyn, and your team for putting this together. We obviously heard today from several residents that this is a big concern of theirs. So I'm glad that we're taking action on this, and we've identified priority areas. Through I'm sure it was a thorough process and a thorough study to get done. So thank you very much for that. And the other point I really wanted to make, which Mayor touched on, just make sure that we're communicating to our residents that this is something that we're actively working on, particularly those in the priority areas, just so that, the gentleman mentioned that, there was a lack of communication since 2010. So let's make sure that we're getting the word out there that this is something the city of Tempe is taking seriously, because we've had a really mild monsoon season this year. It's been terrible, but it won't always be that way, hopefully. So thank you very much.
Councilmember Erdonda Savage.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. First, just thank you to the staff for working through this. I certainly appreciate it. And to the residents for your patience. I think somebody mentioned 10 years. That's a long time. But a couple things that kind of come to mind, and I just want to go back and backtrack. And we're referencing mitigation projects, right? And we're not really getting into details with what those may be. As you see on the list, some of them were significantly larger dollar numbers than others. And then on slide 4 was the discussion a little bit about inspections and cleaning and maintenance. So are we also talking about maybe our process and what we're doing now, our strategies about changing that? So if there is, I mean, because honestly, I've lived in the same neighborhood my whole entire life, and for the very first time, I actually saw them cleaning out storm drains in my neighborhood, and I had never really noticed it before. So are we doing something? I think it'd be really good to know if we're making changes to the current structure that we have right now for inspections and maintenance, if that makes an impact.
Mayor, members of council, that's a great question, and it provides me the opportunity to actually highlight that we have a storm drain maintenance program now. Storm drain maintenance had been bifurcated in the past. Streets was responsible for the cleaning catch basins, and the water utility had the opportunity, when they had the opportunity, would clean storm drains. The outlets were rarely cleaned, or the outfalls. So in the last 5 years, the water utility has staffed, purchased equipment, created a storm drain maintenance program. They've identified the most important locations given how the storm drain system functions. They camera them, they clean them, and they give us information about maintenance that may be capital in nature. We've repaired a couple of storm drains in partnership with them already. Places they found storm drains crushed or blocked.
And actually, on our list there, if you look at the items, there's one at the bottom that says completed, and that was basically a big maintenance issue that we were able to correct.
So as a complement to that, Greg and I then developed this larger infrastructure plan. So the combination, my feeling is that the combination of the robust maintenance program and then the development of this plan, the infrastructure plan, that we're going to be able to move forward in a way that the flood control district and that the city of Scottsdale can feel good about partnering with us.
Well, and maybe that's part of the continuation in regards to the study, is making sure that the team that's out there has all the resources that they need, if it comes to maintenance and what we're doing. Even though it's still fairly new, obviously they're doing a really fantastic job, but there is a lot of cleanup, a lot of inspections, and so I want to just make sure that we are aware of the resources that are possibly needed to make sure that we're doing it the way that we want to.
And actually, one thing, also Jeremy and I have been working together, and he has, in the areas where we found that flooding occurred, where there's storm drains, but there's not a lot of capacity. He goes back to those areas and checks those and reviews those areas more often than some other areas of the city, right, to make sure that those areas are clean during this time of year. If we do get a storm, that they can have as much capacity as available.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really good to know, and I think that would be another really great thing to share with our residents too. And also, I know somebody mentioned about living in the flood hazard area, where you most likely wouldn't buy flood insurance and being in the insurance world. And most people don't buy it unless you're in a flood zone. So I think if there's some way that we can relay some of those concerns to our residents now, I mean, obviously we're not going to hit all these things right away. I mean, I think it would be really wise to be able to do that if there is a way that we can possibly be proactive and let them know. And I think too, it'd be really great to let them know what we're doing and the teams that are out there doing the inspections and doing the cleaning and really working hard. So thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Keevy,
You want to go first?
then Councilmember Adams.
Sure. Okay. So as Kim Logia so eloquently put, the storms, 1,000-year storms are rather frequent these years. We had one back in August of 2018, I believe, and we've had a few in the past decade. So I know with that comes a shift, a paradigm shift, and not just with researchers at ASU, but Maricopa County Flood Control. I know that Harry Cooper is one of those who's participated in discussions at ASU. So I'm hoping that, obviously stormwater is a threat and can be seen as a threat and a hazard, but it can also be seen as a resource where we can capture that water and that runoff. And the paradigm shift is away from gray infrastructure towards green infrastructure. So I hope that when we're looking at solutions, we're looking at green infrastructure solutions, which are usually more small scale, could even be street level scale with, we know about bioswales and the work we're doing in Alameda. That's an example of green infrastructure that will help us to control flooding. And I know there's so much research being done at the Urban Resilience to Extremes research group at ASU and the Decision Center for Desert City. And then the Central Arizona Phoenix Long-Term Ecological Research Project has long focused on stormwater management and on hydrology of flooding in urban areas. I mean, it's one of their explicit topics that they've managed for 20 years. So I hope when we look at possible solutions, we're not just going to look at, I'm preaching to the choir here, but we're not looking at gray infrastructure solely, that we're really looking at opportunities for green infrastructure and to advance that paradigm shift, which is happening across the arid Southwest.
Vice Mayor, yes.
Councilmember Adams.
There were a few LID projects identified that sprinkled in those various projects.
Yes. When you go back to the list of the 15 that are listed here, I just have a suggestion that maybe if we could put in like addresses, blocks of addresses and time frames when they'll be looking at their storm drainage improvements. I think that would be helpful for the residents so they can go to our website and find out when they're next on the list, just to communicate with them so they know these things.
Mayor, members of council, what might be easiest is if we put with maps, maybe identify the locations with maps. And then you'll see these projects, several of them in the upcoming CIP in a 5-year projection. And I think the advantage we have here is that this totals 23 million, but there are substantial opportunities for cost share. And we've already reached out to Scottsdale and the flood control district, and I think we're going to be able to actually get traction on these projects.
Okay, so on the maps, I hear what you're saying. Maybe we could have them blown up a little bit better so people can see their particular streets, and so they can go to it and just say, oh, we're gonna be happening in 6 months or something like that. Just so people understand. I just want us to improve our communication with our residents.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Meeting.
Thank you, Mayor, and I apologize for talking twice on the night of the NFL kickoff. Councilmember Arredondo Savage touched on this. I'm not sure if it was clear or not, but not from her, but the response was. She was very clear. Are we doing anything to communicate to these people that are in the hazard zone right now, saying, hey, you're in a hazard zone, you might want to buy flood insurance. We're working on the problem, but until then, it might be a good investment. And if not, is that something we could do?
I actually encourage anybody to buy flood insurance because if you're not in an actual FEMA flood zone, it's very reasonably priced. So typically when I get complaints from people, I'll recommend that, we're working on these solutions, but flood insurance is a good idea everywhere. But we haven't gone out in particular, gone through and identified particular, or done mailings or anything to particular areas suggesting flood insurance.
I think that's something that would be beneficial for sure, if the council agrees, and it's something we're not already doing. I don't disagree with you at all, but if I lived in a hazard zone, I would definitely want to know that flood insurance is available to me, as opposed to if I didn't, and I'm not sure if I do or not, but if I did, if it turns out that I do, I would definitely buy flood insurance until, some of these projects are coming to fruition.
Actually, if you live in a FEMA flood zone, you would be required to have flood insurance, so.
Linda would.
Fair.
You would know.
Since Randy opened the floodgates, I'm going to say something secondary. But so I just wanted to mention, and I'm remiss in not mentioning that we really need to look at it, have an equity lens to look at flood management, and because floods affect poor people disproportionately, so there's the physical issues involved with the risks and the ones that are most hazardous, but there's also, in reality, who's impacted more, and disproportionately poor neighborhoods are impacted. And there's a group, the Kresge Foundation has done a study in their Climate Resilient and Equitable Water Systems Initiative called Building a Community of Practice at the Intersection of Water, Climate Resilience, and Equity. It's all about how water managers can look through an equity lens to help determine their priorities for stormwater management. So if that's okay, I'd love to send that to you. And
Please do.
Yeah, and just for your information, Vice Mayor, we traditionally projects are ranked based on the dollar value of damage. So the higher value properties rank higher for flood protection. In our study, we didn't use the dollar value of the property damaged. Instead, we used the number of individuals impacted.
thank you, that's great.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, I thank you, Greg and Marilyn, for the great presentation that you gave us. But then there is some potential cost savings when we partner with Scottsdale. So what are we doing to reach out to them, to help work with them? What's our plan on that?
Yeah.
What is our plan?
Oh, sorry. Mayor, we met with Scottsdale. We talked to them about their priorities. These two projects at the top of our list are not at the top of their list. However, the fact that we can submit a joint application to the flood control district enhances the probability that we would receive funding, and the fact that we would cost share with Scottsdale substantially reduced the cost factor in their ranking. And just submitting those two pieces of information took those projects from somewhere lower on their list and popped them up to somewhere in the middle. And that was without us doing anything but explaining that we were just saying we're willing to cost share and to partner. And it automatically increased the ranking for them. And I think at some point, as we move forward, we will submit the projects to the flood control district. And at some point, we'll want to go and talk to the folks in Scottsdale with respect to their ranking. And part of the challenge we have is that the flows are coming from Scottsdale and we need to capture them in Scottsdale to protect the homes in Tempe. So there's definitely they're the ones that will be torn up to build the infrastructure. So they have to be a partner. And when we go talk to them, we may need to engage conversations at a different level rather than ours.
That's why I brought it up. So please keep us informed. And also what was mentioned earlier, some of the challenges we have is just cleaning out some of the storm drains. So whatever we could do to help the residents that came forward tonight to make sure prior to any raining the end of this week, make sure that we have done our due diligence to make sure that those storm drains are cleaned out. Because I know that was an issue in area number 10 by the 60 and rural, that neighborhood behind that church there, because they had some funding. And when Shannon talked about the sandbags, they're all up in that area right there as well.
Yeah. Now, I could talk about this all night, and I know you guys don't want to hear about it all night. But Mayor, Joe hit the nail on the head when he said that there are several pieces of infrastructure linked together: a city storm drain, an SRP drainage channel, culverts under the railroad that belong to the Union Pacific Railroad. We've tried to work with those individuals.
Like 3 different governments.
Right. We've tried to work with those individuals to ensure that the path is clear. But what we've identified in our plan is projects that would not rely on other entities to provide the protection, assuming we maintain it.
So just like the conversation that we may need to have with Scottsdale, let's have that conversation with SRP and Union Pacific. Okay. All right. Anybody else have anything? Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next item on our agenda is the integrated pest management update. Mr. Hayton.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. Craig Hayton, Deputy Community Services Director with Parks and Recreation. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to provide an update on integrated pest management. This is a follow-up from a 2016 work study presentation and really allows us the opportunity as staff to provide an overview on integrated pest management, which will include some key terms just as a refresher, but then really report back on 3 key deliverables from that presentation back in 2016, where we focused on formalizing an IPM program, focusing on organic uses, and then also continuing research and also piloting some organic products. And then also report back on some next steps, some key things that we're working on, understanding that where we are today is different from where we were in 2016, but we want to keep the trajectory moving forward so that we continue this conversation. As staff, Rob Bartlemy's one of our supervisors that's here with us, has been integral in the conversation from the field level, as have other city staff as part of this. So it's been a really great conversation, and then also with outside entities that we've had as well. And certainly questions and input along the way, I welcome that, but also we'll have some time at the end if there are any questions that you may have. All right, so I want to frame the conversation around the 5 key council strategic priorities, understanding that for our community to flourish, these are each important. And really for us to address pests and identify them and how we manage them and how that fits into our community really falls in line with each 5 of these council priorities as well. We're going to spend some time focusing on sustainability and more specifically drilling into performance measure 4.12 as we report back on achieving that performance measure here tonight, which is some pretty exciting news for us. Really is one of those cultural practices that we can do to hopefully provide a cleaner and safer and attractive park system and also landscapes that we manage as well. So starting off with a really high view approach of integrated pest management, I just want to start with some key terms that I'll be using kind of interchangeably here tonight. The term pest and integrated pest management really refers to the general category of a lot of subcategories. Insects would fall into the category, weeds, algae that's listed on there. And each of those, if they were treated from a pesticide perspective or a chemical perspective, so I'll use pest and pesticides, would then be targeted specifically with weeds would be, could be addressed through chemicals like herbicides, mosquitoes through larvicides, algae through algicides, insects throughout insecticides as well. So just really setting the framework that pest and pesticides are a very general term that we can then drill down onto the very specific layer. So just as an overview, integrated pest management really is something that we have been practicing for more than 20 years. It's something that we've been, as has the industry, this has been an approach that has been going on for 20 to 30 years. And it really highlights a decision-making process. It doesn't say that each and every situation is the same, but we want to make sure that we use wisdom and discernment, that we come to each opportunity with new eyes. We don't say we did it this way last time, we're going to do it again. We want to make sure that we do have this continual look and have this ongoing decision-making process as we not only address pests, but even decide if they need to be addressed in the first place. And it's focused, much like on things that we do within the organization, on the triple bottom line, where we look at the social, environmental, and economic impacts of the pests themselves, and then also ways that we choose to manage them. So it really focuses on these 3 key pieces that then inform a holistic approach. It really identifies that we have multiple tools in our toolbox. So through this decision-making process, we decide that we want to address pests. We have multiple avenues to do so. Cultural practices are the things that we can do. Something as simple as cleaning up litter off the ground may reduce rodents or ants. So that's a proactive measure that is a pest measure, a pest management tool that we have in our toolbox. Much like what Greg and Marilyn mentioned, storm drain infrastructure, if we manage those things well, we reduce the likelihood of having mosquitoes and pests that we have to treat through other means. But we also have other ways of treating pests through this holistic approach. We can manually remove pests like weeds. We can pull them manually. We have biological controls. We can utilize fish to control insects or even algae within lakes. And then we do have pesticides as an option as well, which are the chemical means, really that 4th layer in the toolbox. And coming across some verbiage in our research, the City of Davis within their Policies and Procedures Manual for Integrated Pest has a great phrase that says, if risk reduction is the destination, if that's where we want to get to, which can mean both the pests themselves and the ways that we manage them, then integrated pest management would be a vehicle. So we have the goal where we want to get to, we have this vehicle that's integrated pest management, and as we progress in this conversation, I'm going to outline a few different roadmaps that we can partake to get to this destination, understanding that this is an ongoing conversation. So as you can see from the slides, we really manage some very diverse areas and also public health and safety of people and experiences as well as infrastructure. We want to make sure that we take this extremely seriously. And this next slide really highlights on a visual form on the left-hand side this IPM program cycle that the City of Seattle had developed, which really is this continuous decision-making process kind of laid out in chart form where we're monitoring, we decide whether we want to make a treatment or not, And if we do, we make it very site specific, again, using that decision-making process. And then we consistently evaluate, document, and then follow up. And this is just a continual process. And then on the right-hand side, you may be familiar with the pyramid as it relates to nutrition. Very similarly, from an IPM perspective, the goal would be to focus the majority amount of our time on cultural practices. These are the things like proper irrigation inspections, adjustments, aerification of turf areas, making sure that we're cleaning up, as I mentioned previously, before we move on to if we do have pests that have reached a threshold beyond what we feel comfortable with, we do have those four or the three other methods: mechanical, biological, and then chemical controls as well. That's listed on here. Any questions on integrated pest management, just as an overview? Great. All right, so the three things I like to focus on as an update. The formalization of an integrated pest management program, which was attached as one of the items to this presentation here tonight. Our focus on organics, very specifically on compost, and then the research that we've been able to continue doing as it relates to both local, where we stack locally within the state, but also nationally as well. Just trying to understand and learn from what other people are doing and what they have done previously. So starting off with the formalized integrated pest management program, I've listed a couple pieces on the right-hand side. We learned a ton from the city of Portland and what they have done. They had a very robust document, over 100 pages. We didn't want to be that in-depth, but what they addressed, we utilized some of their information as we really looked at formalizing what we were doing here within the city. So really interdisciplinary, interdepartmental staff team came together. We ran our draft through a few boards and commissions, and then we were able to, this past spring, implement our formalized integrated pest management program. And from a purpose perspective, we really, understanding that we have been doing this, we wanted to make sure that we formalized it so that we could really focus on consistency, so that everybody knew that this is what we are expecting our teams to do as we address different things. From a consistency stake, we also wanted to make sure from a purpose perspective that we really identified a pathway for reducing not just pests, but also addressing them through synthetic pesticides. Herbicides has been an area that we have certainly had much discussion on as well, just from the staff level. And then there were some key goals that we have identified within this program. It seems strange that we would identify tracking as a goal. Each individual applicator, as they make an application, is required to track use. But we didn't have as anything that actually kind of flows up into a larger system. So as an organization, we would actually be able to provide numbers on, we used this amount of product, or this park had this amount of pesticide treatment. So that was one of our first and foremost goals. Rob and his team are piloting our internal work order system that we worked with IT to really develop for that, so that we have a much more robust tracking mechanism. But we also wanted to continue to research and then pilot where it was appropriate, and then look and seek for alternative funding sources. We were fortunate this fiscal year to receive some supplemental funding, so thank you very much, to identify an herbicide-free park program, where we've identified 3 neighborhood parks where we were committing not using any herbicides at all. And the goal is to really look at those parks and the ways that we have changed some of our methods or cultural practices to see how that actually has impacted both the look and feel of the park and some of the pests that may be there, but also the data that would be needed to maybe implement that on a larger scale as well.
Councilmember Adams.
When did you start with the 3 parks?
It would have been the beginning of this fiscal year, July 1.
Okay, and any observations so far?
We focus mostly, these parks typically see herbicide treatments in 3 different areas. One is a substitute for some line trimming around some tree wells, for example, 2 decomposed granite areas, and 3 pre-emergent herbicides, which are the ones that kind of put a barrier on decomposed granite areas. Since we've not had a ton of rain so far, we've not seen a large increase in the decomposed granite areas, but we are tracking the differences in labor and materials, both the savings to not using pesticides, but also the labor increases for regular line trimming in the areas. So that's typically what we focused on, understanding we're only a month and a half, 2 months.
We're going to do this for a year?
We're going to do it for a year, and then have an opportunity to, as we hopefully halfway through this year as part of the budget process, see if it's worth pursuing, on a larger level, or if there are other approaches that we want to look at moving forward. Absolutely. And then this document also focuses around 10 best practices, industry best practices, again, from a formalization and then a consistency perspective. We really wanted to focus on clearly identifying responsibilities for the parks managers, the IPM program coordinator, but also for individual applicators, contractors that may be doing pest work in the city, expectations tied to that very clearly, but then opportunities. In what ways can we think outside of the box? City of Eugene has a pesticide-free parks program, which is a little bit different than the herbicide-free parks program, where they partner with residents together to say, we will commit over this period of time to work together to reduce pests. It could be something as simple as they will help weed areas that have decomposed granite with some weeds in them, or just more, supplementing pickups for trash and litter in areas. So this is a great opportunity. We look forward to moving forward with this fall as we move forward. So we're very excited that we have a formalized IPM program. Again, really documenting and formalizing what we've been doing over the past 20 to 30 years. And then equally exciting, we're happy to report back. This is certainly thanks to the kindness of the mayor and council last year for supplemental funding for compost use in our parks. We have had a fantastic partnership with the solid waste team, Tony Miano, Dan Montgomery specifically, and their teams have done a wonderful job taking the material that we create within parks and green waste, turning it into nutrient-rich compost, and then delivering it back for us to then apply in a multitude of different ways. And this has been something that, as we have shot for the 2,000-yard target, we were able to eclipse that this year, so we want to celebrate that at 2,026 yards. And as you can see, we used over 1,500 yards of compost within our park system, but not to be outdone, as understanding what a small footprint golf is within that Tim and his team out at golf have utilized 512 yards of compost, really is a pretty amazing thing and something to celebrate.
Vice Mayor Cubey?
Just a question, Craig, about the performance measure. So it doesn't quite align with integrative pest management. It's part of it, but it doesn't align. Is there a reason, or can we consider updating our performance measure, adding another one that encompasses IPM?
I think that's a helpful conversation moving forward, especially just within the overall umbrella of sustainability, seeing if that's a key strategy that we want to look at. The reason why this one is listed specifically is because it was part of that conversation, but you were right. And that's a conversation we can have with Rosa and her team, absolutely, to see, are there opportunities to identify something more specific? Even as we created the document, there wasn't anything that we could tie to specifically as part of that.
Councilmember Adams?
Yes, the composting, I see parks and golf, but residents can also get the compost, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a wonderful benefit to have, to be able to go down. I've taken advantage of it as a Tempe resident, and I know even in our parks and our neighborhoods, we want to be good stewards and good examples. So, but you're absolutely right. There's an opportunity there for residents too, and to drop off green waste.
I mean, this is something that we should be really proud of. I mean, over 2,000 cubic yards. I mean, that's something that integrating the compost into our own parks, which in our golf courses is really giving the nutrients to see the great parks that we have. I mean, we are the envy of the valley when it comes to parks. So.
Absolutely.
Golf courses have really improved as a result.
We see this as one of those key cultural practices that build up the soil structure. It's something that goes a long way, but takes some time to make sure that we're doing, but also the commitment of our teams working together. So thank you. All right, and then finally, before we move on to next steps, really want to key in on some ongoing research. And we reached out to 18 different municipalities in the Arizona area and did some research. We're only able to find a draft of an IPM program with the city of Tucson, and then what we now have produced as well. Doesn't mean that other organizations haven't. There were some that didn't respond, but I also know that sharing the industry, they do follow IPM protocols, but it's not something that in our research we found another organization within Arizona that had a formalized program. So I think it's important to just frame and to celebrate that we've been able to start by saying this is where we're at and this is where we want to move forward, and then learn as we look at some of the national approaches, especially if we want to reduce some of the synthetic pesticide uses, really seeing what other organizations are doing. And again, we're learning from Portland, but also other key organizations like Irvine, who Tucson is really taking their lead. San Francisco, Seattle, Davis, and Santa Barbara are utilizing different approaches in their approach to reducing pesticide use. First, so just looking at four key categories in any order. This isn't a ranked order here, but there are opportunities that organizations are doing to restrict or ban individual pesticides. This is usually based on the toxicity of individual pesticides that are being used. This is one option that we have found that organizations are using. And I listed various within the memo. There are numerous that are out there that have taken this approach. And even in some of that research have led me to some of the ones that follow after that, like the organic pesticide focused approach is something the city of Irvine is really being known for. That's the Irvine approach that the city of Tucson then is partnering, which then is the organic pesticide approach is exactly what it sounds like. They are saying we will commit to using organic products first. We still want the availability and the opportunity to use synthetics when they're necessary in a targeted way, but we do want to focus on organics. The third approach looks at what is called the reduced risk pesticide list, something Seattle and San Francisco has done, where they take all of their pesticides and they list them by tier. Tier 1 would be considered the most hazardous by their criteria, Tier 2 less, and Tier 3 least hazardous. And their focus would be to utilize those Tier 3 products first. They want to focus on those things that are least hazardous before they focus on the things moving on the higher hazard. And they tend to use a definition of hazard that is the product label, like it says caution, warning, or danger, and then also affects the human health and then environmental health as well. Those are the key pieces to those. And then the final one is what is termed the fair zone approach, pesticide hazard and exposure reduction zones. And that really just adds on to what number 3 on the list is, where there is a list of prioritized chemicals that are available for use if that is an option that an applicator needs to look at, but also areas are utilized and grouped as well. So it doesn't just look at the potential hazard from a product, but it also looks at a hazard and exposure potential, and that's how risk is determined. So not only can you, should you not use this product, but you should use this and only in this area. So it really combines that third approach with maybe even a deeper layer. So these are 4 approaches that we found. I'm sure there are others that are out there, but they seem to fall within these, which really leads to our next steps. Understanding that we don't want to just have an integrated pest management program and leave it on the shelf, but also continue conversations from the developmental and research phase to really push us forward. We don't want to revisit it every year to retrain our staff. We want to have which we will, but we want to have ongoing conversations. So we're forming an integrated pest management technical advisory committee of internal city staff, some external experts, trying to see if we can get another municipality involved as well, so that we can continue this conversation and we can evaluate those 4 different approaches or any other things that we believe are important that are going to help continue to inform what is a program that is a static or a dynamic program, something that could change over time, that isn't expected, to be something we refer to that never changes, but something that does change as information becomes available. So that's one of the key pieces. We had our first meeting last week determining what that makeup of that committee should look like, but then also we're scheduled our first one for the very beginning of October. We want to make sure that we keep that moving forward.
Speaking to the committee, what would be the makeup? Is it city staff, or are we looking for outside individuals, or a combination? What would that look like?
So very much a great question. Thank you, Mayor. We're looking at initially a smaller city staff footprint than what we utilize to develop the program document, but it still will be an interdisciplinary staff team. Braden Kay from Sustainability, discussions with our risk manager, a representative from water, the parks manager, who is the IPM program coordinator, somebody represented from transportation, from parks as well. But then also we've reached out to the University of Arizona's cooperative extension to have somebody from that organization. And then we do think there'd be wisdom in bringing somebody from a different organization, a local municipality, as possibly a way to jumpstart, their formalization of something in ways that we could put together opportunities to grow and learn from each other. Because just because they don't have anything formal doesn't mean they're doing some things that we can learn off of specifically. We also want to commit second to continuing the compost use. Just because we've achieved the compost measure, we don't want to just stop. We want to continue that, knowing that there is benefit in that. Certainly closing the loop environmentally is a key piece for us beyond just the cultural benefits that it provides. And as I mentioned previously, we've got the herbicide-free parks pilot, 3 parks that we're looking at really gaining information from to hopefully possibly inform future asks. And then finally, as I mentioned, we want to implement the pesticide-free park program, which really highlights the opportunity to partner with residents in a pretty exciting way, making sure that we get the word out, but really making it targeted to begin with so that we can learn from that and figure out, again, if there's some program tweaks that we actually need to undertake. So those are our key next steps. I'll be happy to take any questions or comments that you may have.
Vice Mayor, and then Councilmember Adams.
So, Craig, thank you so much. We've had many discussions over the years on
Absolutely.
this issue, and we've taken great strides. And I want you to know I realize that, and that our integrative pest management program is really on the cusp of something. But to me, there's a bit of an elephant in the room, you know what I'm going to say. It's just it's Roundup, and it's the active ingredient of Roundup being glyphosate. So we know that the International Agency for Research on Cancer in 2015 deemed it a likely carcinogen. The World Health Organization made the same claim. There's been, you see it on TV, there's just lots of news about large judgments going to plaintiffs who have been exposed, maybe non-Hodgkin's lymphoma as a result, and large judgments against, Monsanto, against some of the companies. And I know I've been to many presentations, including the Sustainability Commission. We didn't mention Roundup or glyphosate, because I think when people hear that, there's this response, and it may be kind of knee-jerk, but to me, it's a response that it's justified, because you see, and we see, hundreds of cities and dozens of countries around the world are banning its use. And of that list, we actually are a part of that list because we're regulating and reducing pesticide and herbicide use. So, we're in that group. It's a continuum. It's not like either or. It's not black and white, ban, don't ban. I realize it's complex. But my concerns are really fundamental. And I know that we don't apply Roundup and glyphosate just routinely on a field, that it's usually used in spots and areas. It's a post-emergent herbicide, as you corrected me, so thank you for correcting me. So it's applied, in it's sort of spot treatment. And I know that you're working on, and sorry to throw that, after Labor Day weekend, saying, how much do we spend on Roundup and glyphosate, and how much have we applied, and how much does it cost? Because we do hear that one of the problems with not using it is that the organic alternatives are more costly, maybe even, I think, 4 times more costly, and that they're not as effective. But when I hear cost, I think, well, what are we talking about? Are we talking, a couple $1,000s more? Are we talking 10? Is it $1 million more? The costs are important when you consider a negative factor like cost. You want to see what is the cost, and then you have to look, well, what are the external costs? And if we're perhaps causing cancer in a dog or a human being, then maybe that's a cost we'd like to avoid, and maybe we want to avoid the risk of a lawsuit potentially as well. Although I would like to look at the public health impacts less than the impacts of being sued. So I'm deeply concerned about glyphosate use. I know informally it wasn't a city ordinance, but when Ron Pies was director of parks, he did not allow glyphosate to be applied, and so it became sort of a recent addition to our Tempe park management system. And I know we're doing everything right, and we're doing the pilot and all, but I really want to urge us to consider looking at a ban on glyphosate, like so many cities are. And we're not just talking about Chicago. Chicago's one of them, Evanston. We're talking about cities across the country, and we're not just talking about Portland. We're talking about Dubuque, Iowa, Story County, Iowa, Lawrence, Kansas. It's small cities, small towns, large towns. People are taking a second look at glyphosate. And I mentioned about the known carcinogen elements. Well, there's research coming out that while it may be a likely carcinogen, for humans, it's thought to be a known carcinogen for pets, for dogs. And no wonder, humans aren't usually on the ground sniffing around and licking plants, or I'd hope not. Maybe during my wild college days, I did some of that now. So we know that our dogs have more direct contact with it, and we know glyphosate has, I think, 174-day half-life. So it doesn't necessarily go away very quickly when it's sprayed. And then if you have a flooding event, the glyphosate that's sprayed can end up going into our water supply. And we know that because we see that chemical at times in our water supply. Maybe not at enough of a level to give us immediate damage, but with all the other environmental contaminants, it's a worry. So I bring that up because, well, I have one quick question before I sort of sum up, but do we apply glyphosate or Roundup in dog parks?
We don't. We have made that clear within our document. Based on the conversation we had 3 years ago, there was a good discussion on where Mayor Council thought it was not wise to just make some applications. There's the possibility, yeah, absolutely. We've identified some areas that we won't unless certain criteria are met, where we lock it down for a period of time, or we sign it so that people are aware. But we have, to my knowledge, we have not applied post or pre-emergent herbicides. We've generalized that to pesticides in general, not even one specifically.
I'm really glad to hear that. So, I'm not sure if there's appetite here to talk about a ban, and I could send to council an article, a website that lists all the cities and hundreds of cities in the U.S. that currently ban it in some way, shape, or form. But I mean, I would love our council to consider that and to look into ways that we could ban glyphosate use in our city parks, as many cities are doing. But if we are working on this pilot project, I have concern about the equity. I'm going to be the Miss Equity Lens here tonight, but I know the 3 parks that were chosen are, they're all South Tempe, and we have many South Tempeans on the council. That's not why it was chosen. I don't know what their criterion were, but I'm concerned because, again, we have disproportionate impacts in our poor neighbors, and I would hope that we would, if we're going to do this pilot program, that we would add some parks in North Tempe where we tend to have more of our concentrations of poverty. So I'm hoping that at least out of this meeting today, we could get agreement that we should add a North Tempe park or 2 to that list and ensure that that park is a park that represents underrepresented communities.
Absolutely. And as we went through to determine which parks were being used, we looked at, we didn't look at area of town specifically. We looked at, how pesticides were used in the park currently.
Yeah.
And we found that those parks were not ones that were actually being utilized. So these aren't our primary uses. Different teams have different staff members and the ability to apply pesticides.
You're saying they're not being used by people, or we don't use them for? Okay.
Yeah, we haven't used them. So as we went through and we said, all right, let's look at parks that are roughly, when we looked at it, 3 to 4 acres in size that aren't flood irrigated. That was one of the initial things that we looked at. And then we realized that list was pretty small. So we widened it out to 7 or 8 acres. And then we talked to the supervisors that manage those parks. We realized that one of the supervisors in some of the North Tempe areas wasn't currently applying herbicides because he didn't have a certified applicator. So there was no gain in piloting something that he wasn't making any applications to. And that's a tool that he doesn't have available as much as an area that may have more certified applicators. So we certainly could have been, we could have thought through that in a different way. And I certainly appreciate that comment. And it's something that, as I had the conversation with Janae, she just joined her team a couple weeks ago. That was a question she asked as well. I think it's a valid question. And I think it's something we do need to look at moving forward. I will reconsider that with our team just to make sure and to see if there's any tweaks that we need to make from there. But absolutely, that's a valid comment, and I appreciate you bringing it forward.
And to summarize, I know there'll be increased costs. I know there'll be increased labor, but I don't know the extent of that. And that's why, finding out how much we actually spend and how much we apply. And I know it's complicated because we have landscapers and contractors that apply it. So I know it's not an easy answer, and it might be more of an estimate. But I think about Sing Meadows and Ken Sing, and he has this urban agriculture project called Sing Meadows in Tempe, and he doesn't apply any pesticides or herbicides, and he uses good old, what was once Tempe compost. It's his compost. And he does a beautiful job and the soil becomes healthy. It's microbially, it's rich in microbes. And as a result, it is more resistant to pests. And so we have this really great example right in front of us of a best practice. And I would love to see that best practice, applied throughout the city. And if I can't get agreement today to ban glyphosate, I would love to hear from other council members. I would at least hope that we would take a serious look at it in the near future. We do hear from residents about this issue continually, and I feel duty bound to just bring this up because we wouldn't be leading the way here. We wouldn't be this crazy out of the loop city. This is hundreds of cities and towns across the U.S. are doing it, and it's like every week there's a new city. And why aren't we considering that?
Vice Mayor, I appreciate not just the comments here tonight and the questions, but the ongoing conversation that we have had around this. It certainly has allowed our team to push deeper into the subject. And one of the key pieces as we put together the Technical Advisory Committee is seeing which of those 4 options that are more national really have an opportunity to be catered for Tempe. And there may be the possibility of what you've mentioned, whether there are individual products that we just will commit to not using. But also you raise a really important piece is really part of the pest management piece. We always think about what we can do when pests are there. But you raised such a good thing with Mr. Singh and Sing Meadows with what he has done from a cultural perspective out in the field. Adding compost is one thing, but he has been very diligent of adding compost tea and liquid hydrolyzed fish on top of that at a very regular interval. That would be something we would love to pursue as an option. But it's going to take time and materials to do that. We would be happy to see what that would look like on a smaller scale for a pilot to see if that makes, as we partner with the cooperative extension, maybe there are opportunities there to do, to pick some areas that we utilize a couple different products from an organic perspective, but it also comes down to making sure that we're adequately checking and adjusting irrigation, fertilizing, aerifying, all those things run together so that we can be more proactive in our approaches to pests. And that's what we would love to do. So thank you for bringing that up. I think that's a key piece for us moving forward, and maybe an opportunity for future recommendations from our team, looking for, whether it's a pilot project or something a bit more large scale to show the impacts of what we can do. I worked with Ken Singh for many years as I oversaw the Tempe Sports Complex and how we partnered with compost and then fish and tea as well. But understanding there were some labor impacts to it, and we just want to make sure that we appropriately look at that, because understanding that if we spend more time here, it'd be less in a different area, and we just want to approach that wisely.
Thank you for the robust conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Councilmember Adams.
Yes, I completely agree with Vice Mayor's comments about going all over Tempe, including North Tempe, for these studies. Also, I know that the staffing has gone up, and perhaps that will help you with developing these programs and things. And so I'm happy about that. This is an excellent presentation, by the way, Craig.
Thank you.
I like the idea of the pilot programs. I think it's always good to start with pilots first, so you know what works and what doesn't, and to work out the bugs, no pun intended. Also, I like the fact that you're learning from other cities, so you're not having to recreate the wheel. That's good efficiency, and so I appreciate that. Are we still working with Mr. Singh on these things?
I've not reached out to him personally. I know that we sublease the areas. That's a good conversation that we probably could start back up on, especially with those cultural practices.
Okay, good. And great work tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Craig. I just wanted to double check. This is something, you gave some great presentation information on this particular space, which I think is very valuable. And I do agree that pilot programs is a good starting point. If I heard you correctly, some of the reason why you picked the parks had nothing to do with geographic, or had to do with the other parks currently not even using pesticides. So I think that weighed in a lot to the pilot program that you recommend moving forward. How long will this pilot program be?
It'll be for the fiscal year.
Just for the fiscal year.
We'll be able to evaluate halfway through and possibly inform a budget request moving forward at the.
The pilot would determine how much it's going to cost and so forth based on that.
For the herbicide-free
Right.
park, we have looked at this fiscal year with the funding that we have to try and gauge what it would look like, and then have the conversation with the technical advisory committee to see if this is the way that we want to go. That's a purely mechanical approach, not utilizing any chemicals at all. Maybe there's a hybrid approach where we can say we'll just use these products instead, and we'll focus on that.
We're going to, I think it's important that we get the information that Vice Mayor Kibia has presented to us that regarding the pesticides and herbicides. So I think that's really important for us. And then also, I agree with moving forward with the pilot program, looking to how we can expand it citywide. I think that's the ultimate goal. And then with the budget process coming forward, we can have a better gauge as we move forward. But I do agree with a lot of the comments that have been made. Yep, Councilmember Adams.
And I'm perfectly fine with getting rid of Roundup in our city. And so I don't know how my other colleagues feel about it, but I certainly would be supportive of what Vice Mayor's recommendations are regarding Roundup.
Do we use that type of product?
We do. It's one of the tools that we have in our toolbox that we use selectively. So if
But we don't
we can
know the
certainly
extent.
report. What's that?
We don't know the extent. And maybe we could put the actual decision off to, we need to find out how much we do use, because it's sort of an unknown quantity. So we keep hearing it's going to cost more, but we don't know how much we use. So how do we know?
Is there a good way to get some information on that for us so we can make an informed decision?
Sure.
Because I think obviously we don't want to hurt anybody or affect anything. Okay.
Yeah, and it is one of the tools that we use in our toolbox. It is effective, but we also consider where it's used and the applicator and who's using it as well. The other piece of this is maybe there's an opportunity then to come back in 6 months or so, maybe a little bit later than that, as we've gained some momentum with the Technical Advisory Committee to get a broader view on just those approaches, the 4 approaches, and report back on those and what the possible outcomes will be to that as well.
Okay.
Vice Mayor? Can I ask for one more bit of information? In talking to some of the cities that are notably not using it at all and just don't use it at parks at all, could you talk to one of those cities and find out what they are using? And I think it'd be helpful. And I sent you the link, but there's new cities added onto this list every day. And
absolutely, Vice Mayor. I've been on that information. That's what took me to Irvine for their organic approach. And they produce a report every year that provides us information on exactly what products are utilized. So, and we could certainly follow up on maybe as part of that conversation is the use of glyphosate, and maybe that would inform a discussion on whether that's a decision that the council would like to make with that one specific product.
I just want to point out something, because there may be some people in the audience or maybe at home are saying, well, we don't know that that's true. It's a likely carcinogen. It's not a known one. And the EPA has actually said, we don't actually know. They've thrown it up in the air like we don't know that it's even a likely carcinogen. But it's important to point out there's been a lot of Freedom of Information Act releases of documents showing participation with Monsanto and a lot of discussions with Monsanto and EPA officials. And so, EPA is considered a capture agency, with the ones that are doing the regulating are basically are the ones who used to be in Dow Chemical and other businesses. And there was an email where an administration official said to Monsanto officials, "We have your back. Don't worry, we have your back." So there's a lot of evidence coming out that some of that science is being squelched because Monsanto is afraid of losing its #1 selling product in the world, and in the city, in the country.
So would it be?
So if we could just, I think we are in agreement with the pilot program. I think you're very cognizant of the information that has been asked of you. And I know that you're going to come back with more data and information, as the Vice Mayor said, so we can make a more informed decision based on the pesticides that we talked about, what we use. And we don't even know how much we use. Of that, what we do use, hopefully we can get that information. Yes.
Yeah, and we can even look at other products as well and talk through that piece, but
I think it's something that
specifically to
you need to
glyphosate.
go, okay, I think we're all in agreement to move forward with the pilot program that you presented. And from there, that we can get more information so we can make a better informed decision. Does that sound good? Okay. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you.
All right. Next item. Climate Action Plan. I think we have Braden, Grace. Welcome.
Mayor, Council, I'm Braden Kay, Tempe's Sustainability Director. I'm joined by Grace Kelly, Tempe's Energy Coordinator in the Engineering and Transportation Department. We're here with Dr. Lauren Withacombe-Keeler from the School for the Future of Innovation in Society at Arizona State University. City staff is here tonight to give you an update on Tempe's first Climate Action Plan. Mayor and Council joined the Global Covenant for Energy and Climate in 2016. The covenant requires the city to submit a target for greenhouse gas emissions and a council-approved climate action plan by the end of 2019. We are seeking feedback on actions that we are proposing for our first plan. As you will see in the draft document, we have a very long list of acknowledgements for all the partners that have been working hard, namely first both Grace and Lauren, but as well other members of the ASU community, APS, SRP, Tempe Chamber, and as you heard earlier from Kendon Young, the head of our Sustainability Commission, the Sustainability Commission has played a leadership role in the entire process, has been part of the community engagement process, and has helped select the 4 highlight actions that you'll hear about a little bit later. I also want to thank the Media Relations.
No, go ahead and finish. I got
the Media Relations and Communications Department, Neighborhood Services, and Engineering and Transportation for the role. And I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the only reason you have a climate plan in front of you is the work of 2 hard interns, and we have one of them in the back, Grace Logan, who's dedicated her summer to making sure that this document is here today. So thank you, Grace.
And I don't want to skip this. 3 years ago, we agreed as a city to be part of the climate action movement by signing on to the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate Energy. And it really came out of the U.S. Conference of Mayors that had a climate action plan, but then they included mayors in Europe. So then it became global as opposed to just the U.S. And that's something I want to thank our staff and the council for really looking at that, because this is something that I think today, more than ever, that we see the effects of the changing climate, that how it's going to be affected by all of our residents, and even more so with the vulnerable population that we have in our community that we always talk about, equitability and so forth. So I think that has a lot to do with what we're doing as we're moving forward. And as part of the Global Covenant of the Mayor's Pledge, we're required to develop a climate action plan. And I know I'm proud to say, Flagstaff was first, we're second, and I know another city may be following us after us, but I think it's something that we take great pride in, and it couldn't happen, as Braden mentioned, without a teamwork of individuals. So, thank you.
Yeah, great points, Mayor. Really appreciate that. So one important thing to remember is while the climate action planning process is new to Arizona, and Tempe will be the second city in Arizona to do this, Rosen Chowsey reminded me that what we're doing here in the climate action process is aligned with a lot of the performance measures that we're already working as a city on. So there's our municipal carbon neutrality performance measure, there's our citywide 25% tree and canopy goal, there's our 20-minute city multimodal transportation goal. So the climate action plan is a new vehicle for achieving a lot of the things that we're already working on as a city, and I think that's really important to remember. So tonight we're going to walk you through the process that city staff and our partners have gone through to measure our greenhouse gas emissions. Grace is going to update you on our municipal emissions as well as the municipal actions that we've been taking. I will update you on our community emissions and the 12 community actions that we have developed through a community and stakeholder engagement process with ASU. Dr. Keeler is going to walk you through that process. And then we'll seek feedback in terms of things that you would like us to consider in terms of the actions and a greenhouse gas emissions target. Finally, we're going to present some initial concepts we have for our 2021 climate update that we will do next. All right, so there are two key concepts that we need to remember as we approach the wonderful world of climate action plans. First, climate action plans have two parts. Every climate action plan has actions to address greenhouse gas emissions and how your city seeks to reduce them. Climate action plans are also required to address resilience, how your city is dealing with change that's already happening. So our main focus for emissions reduction are energy and transportation, and extreme heat is the focus of our resilience planning. The other key concept is the difference between municipal and community emissions. So there are two ways that city measures their emissions. Municipal emissions include emissions that are coming from our own city buildings, from our water treatment process, from outdoor lighting, in Tempe's case. And municipal emissions also include transportation emissions from city fleet, transit fleet, and employee commute. Community emissions are everything that's happening within our city limits. So that's electricity use from residents, businesses, industries, and institutions like ASU. And then community transportation emissions are from all cars and freights in our city as estimated by MAG estimates. So the Global Covenant of Mayors, Global Covenant, as the mayor described, requires us to do a greenhouse gas inventory for community emissions. Grace and I have already also completed a municipal greenhouse gas inventory to guide our actions for government operations. Grace is going to walk us through the municipal inventory and review the actions that the city is taking. And then I'm going to walk us through the community greenhouse gas inventory and the proposed actions for the community action plan. The municipal actions are not required for the Global Covenant, but we have included them in the plan because residents have asked us to present both. So it's clear how the city is taking action as we develop actions across the community. So I'm going to pass it over to Grace.
So last year, we hired an ASU student to develop a municipal greenhouse gas emissions inventory. This helped us set a baseline and to measure the municipal carbon footprint. 70% of emissions come from electricity for buildings, outdoor lighting, and water treatment. 30% of municipal emissions come from transportation, from city fleet, transit fleet, and the employee commute. So we know we need to work to reduce energy and transportation emissions to reach the municipal goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. So far, we've installed solar panels at 6 city facilities. We've done audits and retrofits for new lighting, air conditioning, and controls in 1/3 of city buildings. The next action is to develop a facility sustainability plan with internal services and Charlie Bladine to determine and prioritize the next investments in energy efficiency. Over the past few years, transportation staff has been working to retrofit 4,000 high-pressure sodium streetlights to LEDs. The next actions are to continue LED retrofits of streetlights, park lighting, and building exterior lighting. The city's 2 water treatment plants are powered with renewable energy supplied by solar panels on site. Water utility staff has been researching technologies to lower water and energy use in operations. The next action is staff will be working with a consultant to do an assessment of water operations to identify ways to optimize energy and water use. Fleet staff has added 20 electric vehicles and 28 electric vehicle charging stations in the last few years. The Orbit and Flash transit buses use alternative fuel, which has lower carbon emissions compared with diesel. So for the next action, staff will be working on an electric vehicle feasibility study and increasing the purchase of electric vehicles. As we work toward the municipal goal of carbon neutrality by 2050, we will partner with utilities on fleet electrification and renewable energy, collaborate with city departments, including facilities, streets, transit, and water utilities to reduce carbon emissions, and measure and report on carbon emissions reduction. Thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Adams.
What alternative fuel does Orbit use?
Compressed natural gas.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Grace, for sharing what we're doing on the municipal side. And then on the community side, we did our first greenhouse gas emissions inventory using 2015 data. It showed us that 56% of our emissions come from energy produced for residents, businesses, industries, and nonprofits. And 43% of our emissions came from our transportation emissions. And you'll also notice 27% of our total emissions come from commercial energy, making that a major opportunity to see an impact in emissions reduction. So now we have the opportunity to address the emissions inventory highlighted energy and transportation as having major opportunities to move forward on climate action. The challenge is that at least 50% of the electricity that powers Tempe homes and businesses come from fossil fuels. That means that there's an opportunity to support businesses and residents in load shifting and in investing in energy upgrades, which can both save them money as well as promote the clean energy economy. On the transportation side, Tempe already leads Arizona in alternative transportation, as you all have been advocating for and working for a long time. The Climate Action Plan is an opportunity to continue to support alternative modes of transportation, which can improve air quality and lower greenhouse gas emissions. And then the Climate Action Plan also provides Tempe the opportunity to work on our resilience to extreme heat. Our region is experiencing increasing extreme heat, and there are actions that we can take to be better prepared. So now that we've identified the greenhouse gas emissions and where they come from, we've partnered with ASU to help Tempe develop Tempe's first Climate Action Plan. Let's hear from Dr. Lauren Withacombe-Keeler about the process we co-developed to create the plan to address transportation and energy emissions, as well as resilience to extreme heat.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you all tonight. As Braden mentioned, my name is Lauren Withacombe-Keeler, and I'm an assistant professor in ASU's School for the Future of Innovation and Society. And I've been working with the city of Tempe for the last 3 years, doing capacity building and community engagement related to sustainability and resilience. And so I just wanted to start off by thanking you all for the way that you have allowed us to engage with you, and particularly the inclusion of students in these engagements. Over the last 3 years, over 30 students, graduate students, have participated in capacity building activities with city staff. I've had 4 students write their master's theses related to this climate action plan. And I've had 7 undergraduate research assistants working on issues that are addressed as a part of the climate action plan. So the way that we conduct the capacity building and community engagement with graduate students, undergraduates, and professors from multiple different departments is a model for a new kind of partnership between cities and universities. And we're really grateful for the opportunity that the city has provided in supporting the education of ASU students who came to the university because they want to make a difference in their communities. So thank you. As a part of this process, we've been supported by the Global Consortium for Sustainability Outcomes. And this funding has allowed us to engage globally with other city-university partnerships and study how these collaborations can create more resilient and sustainable cities, while better training the next generation of sustainability professionals. In August, we received a 3rd round of funding that will continue our collaboration between ASU and the city of Tempe, and also help us share the insights that we have garnered through this collaboration with new partners that we have in London and in Dublin and in Karlsruhe in Germany. So thank you very much. To go into the capacity building in detail, we did the first workshop on resilience and sustainability, and this was with city staff and was focused on fostering interdepartmental dialogue about ongoing and future challenges and how the city can best respond to these challenges in ways that align with and reinforce the city's strategic priorities. And in another one, we did a workshop on setting audacious sustainability goals to prepare for the development of the city's climate action plan. This workshop had city staff imagine a sustainable future for Tempe and identify actions that align with the city's strategic priorities that could help the city be more sustainable in the future. These models of capacity building have been translated to German and Spanish and have been played in other cities around this country and other countries, including City of Portland, Bozeman, Mexico City, Lüneburg, and Karlsruhe through our capacities network. We also conducted forums in 3 challenge areas. These include extreme heat, energy, and transportation. And we met with the transportation department to ensure that the climate action plans were aligned with 20-minute city efforts. And in addition to that, I also conducted interviews with 42 city staff and local business leaders to identify areas of opportunity for climate actions and get input on climate action development, stakeholder engagement, and communication. And I'll just go into detail a little bit about these forms of community engagement. So for the forum discussions, and stakeholders, the forum discussions engaged a wide variety of stakeholders and members of the public. These are listed up there, so I won't repeat them. But the goal of the forums was to develop a set of climate actions for Tempe's plan in the 3 challenge areas, transportation, energy, and resilience to extreme heat, that were supported by the community and that could be pursued by the city and by community members in alignment with the city's strategic priorities. In engaging with city departments, we recognized that the specific actions that were going to go into the climate action plan required input from the city departments, and that everything from community development's input on the green building code to police and fire's input on how we do emergency management demonstrate for us that climate action plan is actually a part of operations across the city, not something that just belongs in the Office of Sustainability. I've done interviews across the leadership of the city of Tempe, and it's clear that city staff and commissioners see a lot of value in the Office of Sustainability. I inventoried ongoing sustainability and climate actions in city departments, as well as opportunities for improvement. And due in part to insights from these interviews, the Climate Action Plan is structured to address key challenge areas for the city, but also to serve as a strategy for the Office of Sustainability to make important progress on resilience and sustainability in tight collaboration with other city departments and in reflecting on the values of community stakeholders. This is an overview of the timeline for our Climate Action Plan engagement, which began formally in the spring of 2018. In the spring of 2018 was when I began to do interviews with city staff and also to train graduate students for the community engagement portion of the Climate Action Plan development. Stakeholders and the public were engaged in forums throughout the fall of 2018 and the winter of 2019. We compiled insights from these engagements and presented them at an open house in March of 2019. Feedback from the open house was incorporated into the Climate Action Plan, which was developed over the summer. And we're currently conducting public forums in September on the draft to receive another round of input on the plan. So this is an overview of the 12 actions that are in the Climate Action Plan. The timeline that I just reviewed, all of the forums and the work of the graduate students have led to a Climate Action Plan that is distilled into these 3 focus areas with 12 actions, focusing on energy, transportation, and extreme heat. And Braden is going to give you a bit more detail on key actions within each of these action areas. Thank you.
So in these 12 actions represent a focused and condensed set of actions. The energy actions really highlight an opportunity to collaborate with Tempe's business community and with utilities on investing in energy upgrades and the clean energy economy. Our transportation actions really are about collaboration and making sure that key businesses and institutions within the city are collaborating with the city on alternative modes of transportation, as well as making sure that the city of Tempe is looking at emerging technologies, including electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles. And then the extreme heat section, really excited that there's some opportunities here that we've already, Mayor and Council have already invested in. You'll hear hopefully later tonight, we have our new urban forester in the room tonight, and we're excited about the impact that he can have on the city being more resilient to extreme heat. And then we also have the opportunity moving forward because of the collaboration between fire and the police department on having a new emergency manager who we believe will be an important player, an important role in the city becoming more resilient. So I'm going to highlight quickly the 4 highlight actions that the Sustainability Commission has chosen to recommend that city staff and mayor and council focus on. So for energy, you've heard already from some speakers about resilient energy hubs. This is an opportunity for the city of Tempe to partner with APS and SRP on solar with battery storage on buildings where first responders are, or where areas of first refuge like recreation centers, libraries, the water plants, churches, and schools. This concept is gaining traction around the country. It allows for cities to step up and support vulnerable populations in making sure that all residents have access to resilient and clean energy in the case of emergency, including blackouts and extreme heat days. The highlight transportation action. Tempe has worked really hard to make infrastructure investments that have made us the multimodal champion of Arizona. However, there's an opportunity to coordinate how businesses, residents in the city use that infrastructure. Austin, Texas, and many cities around the country have transportation demand management programs that include a transportation management association. Transportation staff and economic development staff are excited about the opportunity for us to invest in transportation demand management programming. There's a great opportunity to work with our partners at DTA, the Tempe Chamber, ASU, and downtown businesses to coordinate our transportation efforts. The #1 investment we can make to combat extreme heat is to adopt green infrastructure design standards. This would allow Tempe to take advantage of the rain that does fall to support our urban forestry efforts. ASU, City of Phoenix, and City of Scottsdale have created regional standards but there is an opportunity for us to adopt them so that they're considered eventually for regional adoption. Tempe has the opportunity to lead the region in adopting these standards. Tempe can also tackle extreme heat through the adoption of the 2018 Green Construction Code that will support the use of cool materials and shade. Scottsdale has been a leader in the use of this code, and we have an opportunity to join them as a regional leader in green building. Tempe's first climate action plan is a first step in coordinating how our city takes action to climate change. We also plan to do a climate action plan update in 2021. I acknowledge that there's a variety of elements that we can consider in future plans that we did not have the time or resources to fully consider in our first plan. The following guiding principles have emerged through our work with residents, stakeholders, and businesses. We're excited to do more stakeholder engagement around these principles, and we currently have grants, many of them with ASU, to expand how these concepts can inform climate action in Tempe. We are looking forward to feedback on these principles and whether you have any additional ones that you want us to explore in the next plan. I will say that it's been pointed out that there's an interest in making sure that the guiding principle of equity is considered in these 12 actions. So there's an opportunity for Janae Harrison, the new equity and inclusion manager, for us to do a review of the 12 actions, and to, when we submit the final plan, to submit a memo to mayor and council that talk about what potential equity measures could be put into these 12 actions to make sure equity is included in the first plan as well. So in terms of timeline, we'll be doing 3 public events. One here on this campus next Tuesday in the library, as well as a really exciting heat walk with some of the researchers that are helping us with extreme heat in Kiwanis Park on September 21st. We plan then to come back later this fall for council approval for the plan in its entirety, and then we'll start the 2021 update process this winter. So the last thing I'd like to talk to you about tonight is our need to adopt a greenhouse gas emissions target. It's required by the Global Covenant that we have a target established by the end of 2019. So these are 2 targets that Arizona cities have adopted. A target is a way to communicate a goal for our climate action work. Phoenix has adopted a community carbon neutrality goal of 2060, while Flagstaff aims to reduce emissions by 80% by 2050. Staff is recommending the adoption of a greenhouse gas emissions target that combines both of these. So 80% of our 2015 greenhouse gas emissions reduction by 2050, with a 100% carbon neutrality goal for 2060. So in terms of our request for input this evening, we're hoping for input on the greenhouse gas emissions target, for any feedback you have on the 12 community climate actions, as well as any feedback you have on the Climate Action Plan 2021 update guiding principles. Thank you so much.
Well, first, thank you, Braden, Grace, and Dr. Wheeler-Keeler. Thank you. Now, Wheeler-Keeler, I'm sorry. Withicombe-Keeler.
Kind of like it.
It was just going with it.
Wheeler-Keeler.
Wheeler-Keeler. It sounded good, but no, it's Withicombe. Sorry, Dr. Withicombe-Keeler. And then I believe the intern's name is Logan. But thank you guys so much for what you guys put together in this. The fact that you went out, you spoke to our residents, you spoke to our partners in our community, conducting interviews and having workshops. It doesn't go unnoticed, so thank you for that. One of the things I think we see is the common thread with the 12 community climate actions that we see. That's a common thread there. And I think that's an opportunity for us to partner with some of the people that you've mentioned, which is really exciting because we're working with a whole bunch of different people, from the energy companies, from SRP to APS, Local First, the Chamber, DTA was mentioned, obviously Arizona State, Valley Metro, and ADOT, to really look at some of how we can reach our goals. And they're all agreeable. I think that's something, by you having these workshops and reaching out to our stakeholders, I think really speaks volumes so that we can achieve the goals that we're looking at. One of the things I really want to take note, and you brought it up in one of the slides, the green infrastructure and the low impact development is something I think that we could really take more of a leadership role on. My understanding, I think, working in the flooring industry, we look at all kinds of lead stuff, but the green infrastructure, I think, is something that we should really focus on. I know Scottsdale's done a good job, so hopefully that we can lead from that on the green building code with development. With all the development that we're actually seeing here in Tempe, this is something we could really take a great step in towards. And I think it's something that it can really add to the urban core master plan that we talked about at the last meeting, that we could input or improve with the green building code into some of the contractor checklists and some of the incentives, if you will. I think that's something that I would like to see. The greenhouse gas reduction, I agree with what you had on the slide. It seems like it's very attainable for us. I can open it back up. It was 80% the greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 for the community, and then 100% carbon neutral by 2060. Is that the goal you guys are recommending? I think that's something that I think is very doable. And as you guys know, and we all know as a council in our community, we're doing a lot of this stuff already. We're just putting this into an action plan, a climate action plan. So again, thank you to our staff. We have been a leader in so many different issues. And I think the green building code is going to be another issue that we can move forward on. And as a council, we made a commitment to be really, to be sustainable and also to be resilient. And I think that's something that it hits all the targets that we talk about and what you've achieved. And the partners that I mentioned earlier, I can't stress how important it is that we will be working together with them, because we cannot do it by ourselves. We need those partnerships. So it's important to continue to have those relationships. And I really look forward to continuing to see the work that we're doing for future generations, because if not now, when? So I think this is a great opportunity, and I look forward to hearing what my colleagues have to say. This is exciting. Yes, Councilmember Chin.
Great plan. Thank you. Thank you for your work on this. And you mentioned this at the outset, Braden, where you talked about our strategic plan for the city and how it encompasses so many of those goals, right? Well, also, the initiatives and the goals cannot be siloed on your plate. I think internally, while the mayor mentioned external partners, absolutely, we cannot accomplish this without that. But internally, I see some partnerships also in community development with Chad Weaver's team and Donna Kennedy, as we're talking about green infrastructure, that we need to have those conversations at the outset, that this embodies the values of our community and what we're striving to achieve. So having those conversations and incorporating that into those conversations as we move forward with some partners.
Councilmember Keating, and then Councilmember Adams.
I just want to thank you for putting this together. It's obviously a very robust project, and as the mayor said, it's a lot of stuff that we've already been taking a look at, but it's good to have it all in a document and move forward with, here's an action plan that we're going to implement at some point, hopefully here in the fall. We'll start on that. I agree with the mayor in that I'm very pleased with your greenhouse gas and carbon neutrality goals that you set. It's important that these are things that we're going to be able to accomplish. So, I think 80% of our 2015 goals by 2050 is substantial to do something like that, because we're not just talking about the city of Tempe, of course, but the people that live here. So it's not, it would be a significant undertaking to achieve something like that. And I know Braden, Dr. K, you have your PhD in these matters, so I'm not going to nitpick your expert recommendation, except for when I disagree with it. But I don't at all. I think this is fantastic, and I'm very pleased with this. And of course, it's good to see you again, Dr. Wheeler. I know her name. I worked with her for a while. So I'm very thrilled with this. I'm very pleased that the city of Tempe is going to be following other cities around the nation and taking action on this very important issue, because the fact of the matter is, it really is up to cities at this point in our state and federal government. Largely won't acknowledge that this is an issue. I'm not sure they would admit there was a climate at all at this point. So, I'm very pleased with this, I guess, is the long and short of it. So thank you very much to all three of you and your staff and everyone that went into bringing this before us today.
Councilmember Adams.
Yes, thank you for your thorough presentation. I love the partnership between the City of Tempe and ASU, and so thank you for stepping up for us. One of the questions I have is, I noticed that when we were going through the document that commuting was one of the increases in the greenhouse gases, and I just was wondering if we've looked at our city employees telecommuting as opposed to driving into work to try to save on greenhouse gases. So that's one of my questions. I have a few more comments, but if you want to answer that one first, so I don't just...
Yeah, I'll go ahead and answer
Okay.
that. So we have started some conversations around how, as we do this community transportation demand management, the city itself has a transportation demand management strategy. So that's something that's a set of conversations that we'll continue to have. We have several internal city staff teams that are looking at different elements of that. One of them is around city employee policy, but we haven't, that process is just starting, and we haven't evaluated any specific actions like the one you suggested.
Okay. Oh, thank you. And I like the fact that the Tempe Chamber of Commerce was included along with our businesses. I think it's really important that we continue to get their feedback and partner with them. Also, I just want to suggest the Envision rating system for the engineering decisions. It's a robust rating system for construction, and so I would like to have that at least explored in the sustainability plan for a possible option. And just very impressive presentation, very impressive plan. So thank you so much for your hard work. This takes a lot of hours of work to put this together, and I appreciate your efforts.
Vice Mayor Hubie.
So thank you so much, Dr. Whitcomb-Keeler, and thank you, Grace Kelly, thank you, Logan, and all the students who participated in the Climate Action Plan. And Braden, there's a reason why the Center for the Future of Arizona awarded you the Emerging Leader Award for the entire state. I mean, I think we're seeing the proof here, and this exhaustive public engagement effort has just been tremendous. I'm so proud of what Tempe's doing. I think this is all what we had in mind a number of years ago, before the Amazon was on fire, that we needed to really act. And so thank you so much. Just looking over a few things, the resilient energy hubs is so important to mention that we need our utilities, and we understand their willingness to talk about this, and it's a great thing. But you think about all the I-Help churches that house our homeless, you think about the Tempe Boys and Girls Club and other faith-based organizations, and then we need to make sure that we're resilient. And then when we have a blackout or we have 30 days of 120 degrees the temperature, that we have a place where people can go, a place where young kids can hang out, a place where the vulnerable can be and sleep. That is so important. So I'm very excited about the resilient energy hubs. About transportation, though, I do want to say that I really do want us to look, we are in a crisis, we are in a climate emergency, and I think we need to be talking about transformational investments, because we know transportational investments take a while to enact into your processes as a city. And when you look at Prop 400, that was in 2004, and we're looking at Prop 500 to renew, hopefully, our Maricopa County Regional Transportation Tax. That's 2024. Well, back in 2004, as Jeannie pointed out, Jeannie Devine, we had a different world back then. So a lot of the remaining actions are in Prop 400, or just adding freeway ramps. And I think Anna Nellis pointed that out, excuse me. And we need to really look at transformational ideas and policies and infrastructure. You think about the bus rapid transit, and the young woman from Tempe Prep mentioned that. The city of Phoenix has committed to a bus rapid transit along Baseline, and they're going to stop at the border of Tempe. And it's just silly. We should be thinking about extending it all the way to Mesa and let Mesa carry it through their environs, because bus rapid transit wasn't necessarily mentioned in 2004, but we really need to get on that train, so to speak. And then you think about shade. Who knew that shade is a transportation issue, but it so clearly is. So we could write that into Prop 500, that shade programs could be a part of our transformational investments that our cities can take part in. Another thing is just electrifying our orbits. I know I spoke with Eric Iverson. I'm really pleased to know that we're looking at some possible electric buses, because we know that in the city of Lancaster, California, Republican mayor, Rex Parrish. He's one of my personal heroes, and he has a 100% renewable energy goal for the entire community, not just for the city. And they instituted 100% electric fleet for their buses. And Warren Buffett was so impressed, he moved a company into Lancaster to create said buses. And I think that's one of the companies we're looking at possibly, we're sending our RFP to, so that's exciting. You think about electrification, we say that we want to, in the section on transportation, that we want to increase the number of charging stations. Well, we have to increase the number of electric vehicles, encourage that, working with SRP, I know that's a real commitment they have, that's great. But we have Kevin Devery in our fleet department has managed to get us to the highest electric fleet composition, I think, in the East Valley, if not the entire valley, 6%. And so we should look at revolving funds within the city to encourage that kind of initiative. We don't have a performance measure for electrification of fleets. A lot of organizations are calling on cities to make a goal for electrification. I would like to see us really pump up our transportation section. And I know I've attended many of the climate action plans, and I heard continually from residents, it's a self-selected group. People who go to climate action plans are generally there because they're interested in it. But there was a lot of sort of calling upon the city to do more, to do better. This is a climate emergency. It's a crisis. Let's take a step outside of our comfort zone and also put our money where our mouth is. We need to, really invest, and we can do that in transportation with Prop 500 and some of our remaining Prop 400 opportunities as well. Lastly, and you wouldn't be surprised, and I'm glad you did mention it, but the equity issue, when you read, can we go to that slide where we show Climate Action Plan 2.0? It was one of the last slides, I believe. So we have equity as one of the next areas we really want to focus on. And I know that's not really, we're not ignoring equity in our discussion now. It's very much a part of it. But, and I know equity in action is just getting started, and so that's why we didn't really infuse it throughout the document. But I'm so pleased to hear that Janae Harrison, I'm so glad that you're starting your role here at the city. I'm so glad that she's going to look at this plan with a really, really strong, super sharp equity lens, because that's one of the cross-cutting issues. And to me, it's not just cross-cutting, it's the umbrella issue. The School of Sustainability, the nation's first school of sustainability, has as its #1 priority equity. It's about equity. So I'm really pleased that we're going to take that step, because I think we might find some places where we can strengthen the equity message, because ultimately we want a strong community. And when you look across the world and you look in our country, those who are most vulnerable to climate change are poorer people, they're people of color, and we need to really directly confront that. No matter how uncomfortable that is, we need to confront it. And sometimes the language we use might have a frame that isn't confronting that. It's maybe pushing it away. So I really appreciate that you recognize that. And I also appreciate Arlene Chin, when we had a conversation, she brought this up first and foremost, so thank you for doing that. And with that, I'm very supportive. I'd like to even go more, but I recognize that Portland's on its, is it number 6 climate action plan? This is our first. And it's not baby steps, we're taking a giant step. I always want more, I'm a little greedy, but I am almost 62 years old, so I just want to make sure we can do as much as we can so that young women like Anna Mellis, who spoke today, will feel proud of her representatives, and that 30, 40 years from now, she'll know that we took steps forward to really help confront the climate emergency. Thank you very much.
And then one of the things, do you want me to wrap up, Braden, or are you going to try to wrap up on some of the key elements?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that out of what was said this evening, that I have direction moving forward. Yeah.
You can do that, or either way. Go ahead.
You can go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So do we have consensus that we can move forward with staff recommendation in terms of performance measure as stated?
Yes.
Okay.
I do want to make sure that we have, if we could add the green building code as an element for a bonus section for the Urban Core Master Plan.
Yeah, we've been working with community development about making sure that in the density bonus program that the green construction code is in that menu, and if we have consensus to put that in the actual language of the plan, it's sort of implied but not specific. So if you'd like to have that be specific in the final plan, we can do that.
I'm fine. Is everybody okay with that?
Can I ask?
Yes. Vice
Regarding
Mayor?
performance measures, I know that the Sustainability Commission has talked about the fact that we don't have a performance measure on electrification of our own fleet, and I'm wondering whether we could consider that, because we do mention in the transportation section, in the energy section, we talk about electric vehicle charging stations, and also it seems like we need to have a performance measure for our fleet.
Yeah, there's been a variety of discussions on how to do that as potentially a sub-performance measure. The two sub-performance measures that I would potentially recommend, if there's consensus on it, is one is a sub-performance measure for city vehicles, as well as a sub-performance measure for alternative mode share. And so we don't have those yet, but they make a lot of sense as having to be sub-performance measures of this. And there's been staff agreement that would be appropriate if there's consensus for that.
So is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
Councilmember Keating?
So are we going through these 12 steps individually, or are we just saying do it all?
Yeah, if the feedback is go ahead and move the climate action forward, that these 12 steps are appropriate. I think if you want there to be a memo from Janae and I that sort of review the equity potential in the 12 steps, we can do that. We have consensus on that as well. Okay.
I'm fine with just, you got your 12, we reviewed them at our lunch. I think they're great. Let's just move forward with what you've laid out. Okay.
Yep. And then that's the same with the feedback on the guiding principles. It's just to make sure that the equity principle is also considered in the first plan as well as in our update.
Perfect.
Right, so because we will hear back about that, right? Because I don't want that to
You
go
will,
wrong.
yeah. So we'll make sure that when we submit this for final approval, that you'll have an equity memo in this final
And
submission.
not just equity memo, but there might be edits made within the language that will, I mean, if Janae is going to be reading through this document, she might have some points of.
Yeah, so
change.
if there's specific areas, like for instance, putting an equity lens on the potential initial emplacements of where we put resilience energy hubs. There were, in some of the discussions I've had, there was a sense that might be a good thing to do. So yeah, I think resilient energy hubs is definitely one place where that makes sense. And then in our continued investment in our urban forestry master plan, having an equity component of where we're investing in shade, there's potential for that. So yeah, if there's council direction to add equity language to the actions where it makes sense to add it, then we can move forward with that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. Good?
Yeah, we're good.
All right. Again, thank you so much. Thank you, Braden, Grace, Dr. Withicombe-Keeler, and Logan, and the other interns. So thank you guys so much.
Thanks.
Great job.
Thank you.
All right. Next item on our agenda. Any future agenda items? Seeing none. Next item on our agenda is a call to the audience for the committee of the whole items listed under 4A. We do not have any items for update or for council consideration. So I go to the next item, which is items in progress. Anything needs to be updated as needed?
Can I go back to future agenda items?
Future agenda items?
Yeah. Just to go back to future agenda items, I wonder, we had talked about participatory democracy, and I could possibly bring this up as a working group, but I know that the Mayor's Youth Advisory Council is going to be convening at some point. And I wonder whether we could have Ken look at a possibility of some amount of our budget, maybe a very small amount, but working with the Youth Advisory Commission to get advice on a participatory budgeting decision made by the Youth Advisory Commission on an amount of money within our budget that they could be responsible for devising. It doesn't mean giving them money, let's say it was $50,000, not giving them the money, but just getting their best ideas, and then we could put aside some small amount of funds and consider that as a.
Let's wait until they convene and we have the youth town hall
Mm-hmm.
and have that information ready for us. And then we can make a decision then.
Mayor and Vice Mayor, we have met with the Mayor's Youth Advisory Commission already. And what we said was, it doesn't make sense for us to give you a bucket of money. If you have an idea that cost $1 million and we gave you 100,000, then we wouldn't implement it. If we gave you 100,000, or if we gave you $1 million and you had an idea worth 100,000, where would the other 900? So what we said was, get your best ideas. We will implement them, or we will include them in our budget process so that you all can see their ideas. And if they have an idea, regardless of the cost, that you want to prioritize, we would include that. So what we have not been able to do in the past is include MIAC's recommendations into our budget process. And they are so excited to get their process started earlier and be able to make presentations to the city council of their ideas at a time when you could consider it in the budget process.
So we have one of the world's experts in participatory budgeting, say that 5 times fast, in Tempe, and also the Center for the Future Arizona works with the schools, and it's kind of a defined process. They really make sure everyone's thoughts are solicited, and they go back to their schools, and they bring back, it's kind of a step process. So I wonder if it's worthwhile, reaching out, and I could send you the name of that faculty member. I don't want to offer it up
If
now.
you want to put this on a future agenda, I've studied this, and I know exactly what you're talking about. We can have that conversation. I don't want to go against the process here of having this on the agenda before we discuss it. But if you want to put it on a future agenda, we'd be happy to discuss that. But I just wanted to let you know that we have reached out to MIAC, and we have really excited folks.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Next, all right. We don't have any items yet. Does anybody have any updates as needed for items in progress? Seeing none, I'll close that portion. I do have a couple of announcements before I go to the manager. The first one is, as you may know, next week we have, please join us in our healing fields at 5:30 in the morning. Well, actually, the night before at 5:30, we have a candlelight vigil at 7:30 p.m. next week. But we also have on 9/11 at 5:30 in the morning, we have the whole 9/11 procession. There will also be a 5K run that will be honoring our first responders that will take place as well. And then I also wanted to, do we have a slide for the 5K run? No? Okay. So the candlelight vigil is going to be at 7 p.m. on Wednesday, and we're going to remember the lives of, what happened actually 18 years ago. I think a lot of us can remember where we were at that point in time. On Sunday morning, as I mentioned earlier, there will be a run honoring the first responders for the 5K who sacrifice their lives on an everyday basis. That will take place on Sunday. And then my next announcement, don't forget Friday night, tomorrow night is the City of Tempe night for the ASU versus Arizona State versus Sacramento football game. So we can make sure you all go to the ASU game and support our Sun Devils. And then also, this is kind of interesting. We really want to acknowledge all of us as city employees get emails from our city manager acknowledging the years of service that one has provided to the city. And I would like to acknowledge that our own city manager, Andrew Ching, for his 20 years of service for the city of Tempe. Andrew first volunteered in the city's attorney's office in 1992. He became a law clerk in 1993. He left the city to go to work with the city of Mesa for a few years. He got smart and came back. Nothing against Mesa. I think he knows his hometown is here. He was assistant city attorney for 98 to 2005. And then as of 2006, he became our city attorney. And then he's also a resident for 30 years in the city of Tempe. He grew up here. And I just want to recognize him. I do have something for our city manager. It's a certificate for your 20 years of service. I'd like to present it to you. So congratulations, Andrew, on your 20 years. Thank you.
Sounds like 10 minutes. Sounds like you know it's good.
And then also, not to outdo 20 years, but Greg, I think you surpassed that by 10 years? 30 years? Congratulations, Greg, on your 30 years with the city as well.
Can I say one quick thing?
Yeah.
He regaled me with I asked what the funniest or most unusual meeting was, and it involved a Hooters use permit. So sometime ask him about that.
That after the meeting.
You were there. Oh, it's you.
It wasn't me. That was pre-me. All right. With that, Mr. Manager, do you have any announcements?
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the acknowledgement. It's a privilege and an honor, and I think people say that, but it truly is the case for me that working here and making a career here at the city of Tempe, where I've actually called my home for 44 years, actually. It means a lot, and it means as much today as it did the first day that I worked here. The cumulative time, although it's 20, my actual years of service is 20 with the city, but I actually worked here in some capacity for 24 years out of that 27 years you were talking about. So it means a lot. This is an incredible organization, and to be associated with this incredible organization is humbling, and it's a great honor. Speaking of people who are now associated with our great organization, I want to first take the time, although her name has been dropped a few times already, and I think I mentioned at a previous meeting that she was unable to attend. But Jonay Harrison is here, our new Equity and Inclusion Manager. She's sitting in the back there. If you mind standing just real quick so we can all acknowledge and say thank you for joining the Tempe team. As you can tell from the presentations and the mentions already, she has a lot of really great work ahead of her here, and we're super excited to have her do that work with us. Also, I want to welcome Richard Adkins, who's also here, the state's first urban forester, and also Tempe's first urban forester, who started with us on August 19th. He joins the Tempe team with more than 25 years of desert Southwest tree experience, including the last 13 years working as the City of Phoenix's forestry supervisor. So we're excited that he came to Tempe. He's a local and national leader in urban forestry and is the incoming president of the American Society of Consulting Arborists. I think I lost that presidency vote by one vote, I think. Just kidding. But that's exciting as well. And it goes without saying that he's passionate about trees, and he's looking forward to making a lasting impact on our community, especially to work on our recently adopted urban forest master plan, of which there was a photograph of you already in it, so which is nice. I had a chance to sit and have a good conversation yesterday with Richard about trees and about the work ahead of him, and he is going to be just an amazing asset for this community. I'm really excited to have him get going, so welcome. To Cummings, I just wanted to also mention a going as well. Holly Rosenthal, who's in the back of the room, our Deputy Municipal Utilities Director over the water utility, has accepted a job with the City of Phoenix, but will be staying on for another few weeks as part of the transition, which we appreciate. I think it's been a little less than 2 years when I had the opportunity to introduce Holly to Tempe, and we really appreciate your service. We know that this is an excellent opportunity for you professionally, and we're excited that you will be working directly for Catherine Sorensen, who I will say is a former Tempe resident and a graduate of McClintock High School. So it's not like you're going to be leaving Tempe all that much anyway. So we wish you all the best. And thank you very much for your service. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Andrew. With that, our next meeting is September 19th, 2019. With that, we are adjourned.